We opened today's session with welcome and opening remarks by Dr. Lewis and Mr. Fukunaga, who emphasized the collective call to action from strengthening the commitment to continued robust data and opportunities for connecting the science with the policy. We then heard from Professor Meng Fan on the key findings from the fourth periodic report on the state of acid deposition in East Asia. And then, of course, just now, we very much enjoyed an interactive panel with both the EANET Scientific Advisory Committee members, also policymakers, as well as representatives from related organizations. So during this, what did we discover? What did we experience? Quite a few different updates for sure, as well as the pieces and threads of next steps. So let me, if you don't mind, I'll just highlight a few that came up that we touched on. So one was highlighting the importance of multilateralism to address the triple planetary crisis, reflecting on the establishment of UNEP actually in 1972, when all of the governments came together to address these global environmental problems, including acid deposition, and now most recently with the scope expanded air pollution. We also discussed how EANET has provided some great efforts to understand the acid deposition and air pollution as shown in these periodic assessment reports. So just in reflection, what have we noticed over the years? And of course, today was really dedicated to the latest one, the PRSAD4, which showcases the data and experience, drawing on the decades, most recent ones, but also the extensive wet and dry deposition monitoring network established by EANET and how impressive it is, as well as the number of government officials and experts trained. So the data shows that while impacts of acid deposition in soil and vegetation, as well as inland waters, is not that high, as we discussed in the very beginning part of the presentation, levels of sulfates are significant when compared to the US and Europe, and increasing levels of ground level ozone in developed countries, increasing PM 2.5, NOx in developing countries in the EANET region are something that we're still obviously flagging and taking strong notes of. So some of the information on the relatively high levels of the calcium carbonate in the EANET region also was outlined as providing a buffer on the impact of the acid deposition on soils and inland waterways. So that was touched on a few times actually. So knowing that acid deposition causing chemical compounds, SO2, NOx, also influence air pollution, policies are now being aimed at reducing the sulfur emissions in mobile and industrial sources, like in Malaysia, Mongolia, the Philippines, and Thailand. That's also what we learned from our panelists today. And then very importantly, the capacity building efforts like emissions inventories have indirectly contributed to the development of policies. So one of the key things as we move forward, as we're thinking about this expansion of scope and the new EANET project fund and mechanism will be there to support and promote more actions to reduce acid deposition, but also improve the air quality. So in kind of final conclusion, some of the other key things that were brought up thematically was also around the importance in the role of the science policy interface and the role that EANET plays in the region, especially at national level policy making through its capacity building efforts. So that's including, of course, as also discussed, EANET being drawn on as a baseline resource for information in some countries. So lastly, raising the issue of acid deposition and air pollution also as a human right was brought up, and especially as the more vulnerable parts of society are affected due to more exposure, also lack of tools and resources to protect themselves. These are the kinds of things that I think are part of that call to action to building out a stronger monitoring base, monitoring stations with high quality. So the learnings, of course, there are many, many more. Those were just some quick recaps in broad brushstrokes and bullet points, but more will come in terms of the next steps.